The day I bought my dream house, I should have asked why it was so cheap. But I didn't. Because when you're 34 years old, recently divorced, and staring at four walls of a rented apartment that still smells like someone else's life, you stop asking questions and you start signing papers. That's exactly what I did. And that decision, that single, careless afternoon when I handed over every dollar I had saved in 11 years, changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about the people I trusted, and about the terrifying truth that can live quietly inside the walls of a house for decades, waiting for someone to finally be brave enough to open the door. My name is Daniel Marsh. And this is the story of the locked room. The house was listed on a Tuesday. I saw it on my phone during lunch, the kind of mindless scrolling you do when you're eating alone for the fourth time in a week. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, half an acre of land on the edge of Millhaven, a small town in western Pennsylvania that I'd driven through once and half remembered as the kind of place where people still wave at strangers. The price was wrong. I don't mean it was too high. I mean it was so low that I actually laughed out loud in the middle of the diner, alone at my corner table, and the waitress looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I called the realtor that same afternoon. Her name was Patricia Webb, a compact woman in her mid-60s with silver hair pinned back tightly and eyes that measured everything very precisely, like she was always calculating something just behind whatever smile she was wearing. She met me at the property on Thursday morning. The house sat at the end of a gravel lane, surrounded by old oak trees that had grown so large their roots had started lifting the driveway in long, slow waves. The house itself was pale yellow, or had been once. The paint had faded to something closer to the color of old paper. But the bones were good. You could see that immediately. High ceilings, original wood floors, a wide staircase with a carved banister that must have been beautiful once and could be again. Patricia walked me through the main floor without much commentary. Kitchen, dining room, living room, a small study. She mentioned the roof had been redone 7 years ago, pointed out a crack in the hallway plaster she said was cosmetic, and kept moving. Upstairs, she showed me the master bedroom, a guest room, a bathroom with original black and white tile. And then we came to the end of the hallway. There was a door there. It was narrower than the others, painted over so many times that the hardware had partially sunk into the layers of white, and there was a lock, a keyed lock, the old-fashioned kind, the kind you'd need a skeleton key to open. I reached out and tried the handle, just instinctively. It didn't move. "What's in here?" I asked. Patricia didn't miss a beat. "Storage," she said. "Sealed up years ago. The key was lost. Previous owners never bothered with it." She was already moving back toward the staircase. "Shall we go over the paperwork?" I looked at that door for another few seconds. There was something about it, not sinister, exactly. More like a question that hadn't been answered yet. But Patricia was already on the stairs, and the house was extraordinary, and the price was impossible to walk away from. So I followed her down. I signed the papers 3 days later. The key to the locked room was not included in the closing documents. I told myself it didn't matter. It was probably just empty anyway. I moved in on a Saturday in late September. My friend Marcus helped me carry boxes, complaining the entire time in a way that was so familiar and comfortable it actually made the day feel almost normal. Marcus Delray had been my best friend since college, tall, loud, opinionated about everything from football to architecture, and one of the few people who had stayed close after the divorce. While we unpacked the kitchen, he kept glancing at the ceiling, at the walls, running his hand along the woodwork with an expression that shifted from impressed to suspicious and back again. "Man, what did you pay for this place?" he asked again, because I'd already told him and he still didn't believe it. "Patricia said the estate just wanted a fast sale," I said. "An estate? So someone died here. People die everywhere, Marcus." He looked at me. "That's both true and deeply unhelpful." He picked up another box. "What's upstairs at the end of the hall?" "That narrow door. Locked room. No key." He stopped walking. "And you bought the house anyway. It's probably empty." "That's what people say before the terrible thing happens," he said. And then he laughed, because Marcus laughs at almost everything, and I laughed too, and we kept unpacking. But that night, after Marcus left and the house settled into its first quiet dark around me, I lay in the master bedroom and listened. Old houses make noise. Everyone knows that. They expand and contract with the temperature, the joists flex, the pipes knock. But there was one sound I couldn't place. A very faint, almost nothing, really, a soft, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the direction of the hallway. I told myself it was the wind. I fell asleep telling myself that. The first week, I focused on the practicalities. I hired a local handyman named Gerald Foss to look at some of the plumbing and give me a quote on the kitchen. Gerald was a quiet man, maybe 70, with enormous hands and very few words, which I respected. He walked through the house methodically, made notes on a pad, and when we got to the upstairs hallway and he saw the locked door, he stopped. He stood in front of it for a moment without touching it. Just stood there. "You going to open that?" he asked. "I don't have a key," I said. "Did you know the previous owners?" Patricia Webb said it was an estate sale. Someone named Alderman. Gerald's face changed. It was subtle, the way a very controlled person's face changes when something hits them from the side they weren't watching. His eyes went to the door and then away. "I knew of them," he said carefully. "The father, Howard Alderman." He didn't say anything else. I waited. "That's above my pay grade," he finally said, and went back to his notes. He finished the walkthrough quickly after that and left before I'd expected him to. I looked Howard Alderman up that evening. It wasn't hard. Small towns keep records in ways that cities don't. People remember, obituaries linger on local newspaper websites, community boards hold onto history. Howard Alderman had died 14 months before I bought the house. He was 79 years old. He had lived at the Millhaven property for over 40 years. He had no surviving spouse. His wife, Eleanor, had died in 2009. He had one child, a daughter named Claire, who had moved away from Millhaven years ago and was listed as the executor of the estate. There was a photograph from a 2004 community event. Howard Alderman was a large man, broad-shouldered even in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been built for hard weather. He was not smiling in the photograph. He was looking at the camera as if he found it slightly irritating. I found nothing unusual about him. No scandal, no arrest record, nothing in the local news beyond a brief mention of his passing. But I also found almost nothing about his daughter Claire. One reference in a 2001 school honor roll listing. And then nothing. It was as if, after a certain point, she had simply stopped existing in the public record. For a town the size of Millhaven, that was odd. People in small towns don't disappear from the record. They appear in church bulletins and volunteer rosters and letters to the editor. Claire Alderman did not. After 2003, I could find no trace of her at all. I drove to the county clerk's office the following Monday. I told myself I was just curious, that this was nothing, that I was a man in a new house filling time. The clerk, a young woman named Diane, was helpful enough. She pulled the property transfer records on the Alderman house. The executor of the estate was listed as one Robert Calloway, an attorney in Pittsburgh. There was no mention of a daughter. I asked Diane if she knew the family. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother would know more. She grew up on that road." She wrote her mother's name on a piece of paper and slid it across the counter. Vera Simmons. A phone number. I called Vera that evening. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her I'd bought the Alderman house, there was a pause long enough to make me straighten up in my chair. "Why are you calling me?" she asked, not unkindly, but carefully. I told her about the locked room. I don't know why I led with that. It just came out. And there was another pause, and then Vera Simmons said, "You should come see me." She gave me her address. She said to come Tuesday. Vera lived in a tidy brick house on the far side of town, a place that smelled of pine cleaner and old books. She was a woman in her mid-80s, small and deliberate in her movements, with the kind of sharp eyes that have seen enough of life to be neither surprised nor particularly impressed by most of it. She sat across from me at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't touch and looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "You need to understand," she said, "that this town has carried something for a long time. Some of us are glad someone's finally asking." She told me about Eleanor Alderman first. Eleanor had been a warm woman, Vera said, artistic, gentle, the kind of person who brought food when your husband died and remembered your children's birthdays. She had 2 children, Vera told me. A son, Thomas, who was 8 years older. And Claire. I stopped her. The records only mentioned Claire. There's no record of a son. Vera nodded slowly. There wouldn't be. Thomas Alderman died in 1987. He was 22. A car accident, the family said. The funeral was private. Very private. She wrapped her hands around her teacup. But there were people in this town who never believed it was an accident. I sat very still. Howard was not a gentle man, Vera said. Behind closed doors. You understand me. She didn't elaborate, and she didn't need to. Eleanor stayed. Women in those days, in that kind of marriage, they stayed. But after Thomas died, something in Eleanor broke. And Claire was only 12. She grew up in that house after that. Alone with Howard. What happened to Claire? I asked. Vera looked at me steadily. When Claire was 19, she left. Just gone. No goodbye, no forwarding address. Eleanor told people Claire had moved to the city for work. But I saw Eleanor 2 weeks after Claire left. I brought her a casserole. And Eleanor, this woman I had known for 30 years, she looked at me and she said, very quietly, Vera, I don't know where my daughter is. And I'm afraid to find out. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed. Inside, neither of us moved. Eleanor died in 2009, I said. Of a stroke, yes. I was with her at the end. Vera finally lifted her tea, held it without drinking. She said Claire's name. At the very end. Just once. I drove home from Vera's house with my hands tight on the steering wheel and the October light going gray and thin through the trees. I don't know what I expected to find in that locked room. I'm not sure I expected to find anything, even then. I think I just needed to know, the way you sometimes need to walk into a dark room not because you're brave but because not knowing has become its own kind of unbearable. I called a locksmith. His name was Pete Garrity, a young guy, maybe 25, who showed up in a truck with a sticker for a local radio station on the bumper and a set of picks in a worn leather roll. He looked at the lock, tried 3 picks, selected a 4th, and had the door open in under 8 minutes. He stepped back and gestured with the ease of someone who has opened 100 doors that other people couldn't. All yours, he said. He waited in the hallway while I reached in and felt along the wall for a switch. I found one. A single bare bulb came on. The room was approximately 10 feet by 12. The walls were plaster, painted a deep green that had darkened with age. There was no window, just a vent near the ceiling, covered with a rusted grate. The floor was bare wood. And the room was not empty. Along one wall, there was a narrow cot, a child's cot really, with a metal frame and a bare mattress. On the floor beside it, a small stack of composition notebooks, the kind you buy at a drugstore, black and white covers, edges soft with age. On the wall above the cot, small pencil drawings, dozens of them, drawn directly onto the plaster with a careful, patient hand. Flowers. Trees. A house that looked nothing like this one. A small, simple house with smoke coming from the chimney and a garden in front and a figure standing in the doorway, arms open. And words. Written in pencil between and around the drawings, in handwriting that started large and uncertain and grew smaller and steadier as it progressed around the walls. I leaned closer to read the first line I found. Today is the 14th day. I am making the flowers bigger so the room feels less small. My throat tightened. I reached down and picked up the top composition notebook. I opened the cover. Written on the inside, in that same handwriting, this belongs to Claire Alderman. If you are reading this, please help me. The air in that room felt different. Heavier. I sat down on the floor, there was nowhere else, and I opened the notebook, and I began to read. Claire Alderman had been locked in that room at the age of 14. Not continuously, she made that clear in the early entries, written in the stilted, over-explained way of a young person trying to document something carefully. Her father had installed the lock after she'd tried to tell a school counselor about what happened at home. The school had called Howard. Howard had dealt with it, as he dealt with everything, quietly, efficiently, and in a way that left no mark anyone outside the house could see. Claire wrote about the first time he locked her in, which was a punishment that lasted a weekend. She wrote about how she had decided, during that first weekend, to think of the room differently. To make it hers. She had asked her mother for composition books, claiming she was keeping a diary for a school project, and Eleanor had brought them without asking questions, or perhaps without allowing herself to ask questions, which was a different thing. Over the next 3 notebooks, I read through the growing dark of that afternoon, the single bulb burning above me, Claire wrote about her life with a clarity and a dignity that made my chest ache. She wrote about her brother Thomas, who had been the only one who had ever stood between her and her father, and what it had meant to lose him. She wrote about her mother's silences and her mother's apologies, which were never spoken aloud but appeared in small gestures: a piece of chocolate on Claire's pillow, a library book left outside the locked door during one of the longer punishments. She wrote about school, about a girl named Meg who had been kind to her, about a teacher named Mr. Poole who had once told her that she had the eyes of a painter. And she wrote, in the last notebook, the handwriting more confident now, the voice of a young woman rather than a frightened girl, about a plan. She had been saving money for over a year. Not from an allowance, Howard didn't give her one, but from small jobs she'd invented reasons to do. Helping a neighbor carry groceries, returning bottles for the deposit, selling pencil drawings to classmates for 50 cents each. She had enough, she wrote, for a bus ticket to Pittsburgh. She had contacted, through a careful series of payphone calls made during school hours, a cousin of her mother's who lived there, a woman named Ruth who had met Claire once at a family gathering and who had said, in the distracted generous way of someone who doesn't think they'll be held to it, "If you ever need anything, sweetheart, you just call." Claire had called. Ruth had answered. The last entry was dated March 18, 2003. It was 8 sentences long. "Tomorrow I leave before he wakes up. I have my bag packed and hidden at school. I have Ruth's address memorized. I am not taking the notebooks because I don't want to carry the weight of this place. But I want someone to find them someday. I want someone to know what happened in this room. I want Thomas to know I remember him. I'm going to open the door now and not look back." I sat on the floor of that room for a long time after I finished reading. The light bulb hummed. The house around me was very quiet. Outside, through the vent in the ceiling, I could hear the oak trees moving in the wind. Eventually I got up. I carried the notebooks downstairs carefully, the way you carry something that has weight beyond its actual mass. I set them on the kitchen table and I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. I told him what I'd found. He didn't say anything for a while, and then he said, "Daniel, you have to find her." I know that's what you're thinking too. And I need to tell you, it wasn't simple. It took longer than I expected, and it went in a direction I couldn't have predicted. But I didn't stop, because those notebooks were sitting on my kitchen table, and every morning I made coffee and looked at them and thought about a 14-year-old girl making pencil flowers on a plaster wall to make a locked room feel less small. I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank Shelley, a retired Pittsburgh cop who worked out of a 2-room office downtown and charged by the day. I gave him everything I had: Claire's full name, the cousin Ruth, the bus ticket to Pittsburgh, the year 2003. Frank was methodical and not particularly warm, which was fine. I didn't need warm. I needed efficient. He called me 12 days later. "Claire Alderman is alive," he said. "She's been living in Harrisburg under her married name for the last 18 years. Claire Novak. She's a high school art teacher." He paused. "She has a family. A husband, 2 kids. She's built a whole life." I asked him if she'd contacted me, the new owner of the house. "No," he said. "She didn't know the house sold. She barely knows anything about it. She left everything behind when she left, including the knowledge of what happened in it. I think she's been trying very hard not to think about it." I asked him not to contact her. He seemed relieved not to have to. I sat with that for a week. I thought about what it meant to find someone who had survived something and built a life from the ruins of it. I thought about whether reaching out to her would be generous or whether it would be ripping open something she had spent years carefully closing. I thought about Thomas, whose death the town had never fully accepted as an accident, whose name appeared in Claire's notebooks with the kind of love that doesn't have edges. I thought about Eleanor saying Claire's name at the very end. And I thought about the notebooks. About Claire's last entry. "I want someone to find them someday. I want someone to know what happened in this room." She had asked for a witness. Not a rescuer, she had rescued herself. Just someone to know. I wrote her a letter. I spent 4 days writing it, which tells you something. I didn't lead with the notebooks. I introduced myself as the new owner of the house. I told her I'd found the locked room. I told her I'd read what she'd left there. And I said that if she ever wanted the notebooks, or if she wanted to know that someone had read them and understood, I was here. No pressure. No expectation. I included my phone number and my address. I mailed it to the school where she taught, marked personal. 3 weeks passed. I was on the porch on a Sunday afternoon in November, the kind of cold clear day where the sky is so blue it looks like a different season, when my phone rang. The area code was Harrisburg. Is this Daniel Marsh? Her voice was steady, measured, careful in the way that Vera Simmons's voice had been careful, the voice of someone who learned early to hold themselves together. Yes, I said. A long pause. You read them. I read them, I said. All of them. Another pause. Then, in a smaller voice, something underneath the measured adult voice, something that sounded much younger, did you read about Thomas? I had to take a breath. I did. He sounded remarkable. There was a silence on the line and then a sound that I understood was Claire Novak, née Alderman, pressing her hand over her mouth, and I looked at the oak trees in my yard and gave her as much time as she needed. She drove up the following Saturday. She came alone. She'd told her husband she was seeing an old acquaintance, which was one way to frame it. She was 50 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's broad shoulders, and she stood at the end of the gravel lane for a moment before she walked toward the porch where I was waiting. She was looking at the house with an expression I couldn't fully read, not fear, not grief, but something more complex than either. Recognition, maybe. The way you look at a thing that shaped you. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table where her notebooks were stacked, and she looked at them but didn't reach for them at first. She asked me what it was like living here. I told her, honestly, that it was a beautiful house and that it had felt strange and sad since I opened that room, but that I thought the strange and sad was something that could lift. She nodded, like that made sense to her. I thought about burning the notebooks, she said. Before I left, I thought about taking them and burning them so there'd be no proof of anything. She reached out and touched the top cover. But I was 19 and I thought, I hoped, that there was a reason to leave a record. Even if no one ever found it. Someone found it, I said. She looked up at me. Her eyes were bright and steady. Yes, she said. Someone did. She took the notebooks home with her. Before she left, she went upstairs. I offered to come with her, and she shook her head. She needed to do it alone. She was up there for about 20 minutes. When she came back down, she had pencil dust on her fingers from where she'd touched the drawings on the wall. She stood in my front hallway in her coat and looked at me. I'm sorry, she said, that you bought this house with all of this in it. Don't be, I said. And I meant it. Because some things need to be found, and whoever finds them carries something forward that would otherwise be lost. I didn't say all that to her. But I think she knew. She drove away down the gravel lane, and I stood on the porch and watched until her car disappeared into the trees. The oaks were bare now, the sky above them pale and wide. The house behind me sat in the afternoon light, and for the first time since I'd moved in, it felt settled. Like something that had been held in tension had finally, quietly, been released. I repainted the room that winter. I thought a long time about what to do with the drawings on the wall, and in the end I photographed every one of them before I painted, hundreds of photographs, stored carefully. The room is a reading room now. There are bookshelves along 2 walls and a good lamp in the corner and a window I had cut through the exterior wall so that in the mornings it fills up with light. It's the best room in the house. Claire Novak and I are not close friends, that's not what this story is. But we've exchanged letters a few times, and last spring she sent me a photograph of one of her own paintings, a canvas piece with a small house in it and a figure in the doorway. She wrote on the back, in that same handwriting I'd read by a bare light bulb on a floor in October, I made the flowers bigger so the room feels less small. I have it framed on my wall. I bought this house because the price was wrong. And slowly, room by room, year by year, I've come to understand that it was wrong because something in it needed to be found. You don't always know, when you open a door, what you're going to carry back through it. But sometimes the carrying is the point. Sometimes the witness is the gift. Some rooms are locked because the people who locked them were afraid of what they contained. And some of those things, the things they were most afraid of, turn out to be the ones most worth knowing. The house is mine now. It's warm. It's full of light. And the locked room at the end of the hall is the brightest room in it. If this story moved you, if you found yourself somewhere inside it, please give it a like. It helps more people find it, and some stories deserve to be found. Subscribe if you want to hear more. because there are more rooms in this world worth opening, more voices worth listening to. And leave a comment below, tell me what you would have done when you saw that locked door. I really want to know.